So good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really honored to be here in person this time, as I could be here in June only virtually. The thesis of my paper at the conference on Metamorphoses in June was as follows. Rituals and processional rituals in particular served as a mirror of and a negotiating space for urban change. And I illustrated this claim with a case study on the funeral processions of the Roman nobility, which anchored the political change from the Roman Republic to the Imperial period into the urban landscape. And in a way, I'm picking up that theme today because my short lecture now is again focused on the deceased emperor. However, I'm not looking at the rituals of their burials, but rather at the topography, function, and above all, tradition of their place of burial. In this, according to my thesis, a long-term view shows how religious and political ideas have a lasting influence on concepts of urbanity. I begin where I ended in the summer in early Imperial Rome at the turn of the first, this is the thesis I just mentioned. So here I begin where I ended in the summer in Rome at the turn of the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD. It doesn't seem presumptuous to speak of an urban revolution under Emperor Augustus, and we have this in the ancient sources as well. Augustus redefined urbanity, or metropolitanism, as we would call it in our graduate school in Regensburg, as well as in material terms as an idea, and as an idea. The urban revolution manifested itself above all through a new occupation of the city by the princeps, by the emperor, and that associated with the death, obsequies, and cult of the emperors. One landmark of the city transformed by Augustus was his mausoleum, built on the Mars field, the Campus Martius, as early as the 30s BC, when the new monarch was just in his late 20s. The tomb dominated the area and offered the observer an impressive picture. It stood in a public garden and was isolated by a fence or enclosure of some kind, like a sacred building. Externally, the monument took the form of a huge conical tumulus. You can see it on the left side here on my slide. And this was achieved through the construction of 5 concentric circular walls. You can see it on the right side of the slide. The outer wall had a diameter of almost 90 meters, and the 4th ring formed the base for a second cylinder above it with a diameter of 30 meters. The inner ring enclosed the burial chamber with 3 niches for the urns. And a colossal statue of Augustus stood atop the tomb, which was 45 meters high. The construction of the mausoleum is generally interpreted as Augustus's response to the decision of his great rival Mark Antony to be buried in the Egyptian metropolis of Alexandria. It is further said to represent Augustus's preference for italic funerary models. However, I think the complex has a much broader claim, shown by its very designation as a mausoleum, which has come down to us via the ancient author Strabo, a contemporary author in the Augustan time. The building is thus clearly in the tradition of Hellenistic royal tombs. The mausoleum of the Hellenistic kings were certainly the most important inspiration in terms of layout and function. The tomb of Mausolos of Halicarnassus and the tomb of Alexander the Great, which Augustus himself visited. In these 2 cases, the tombs were not only places of remembrance for great rulers, but also linked to the memory of the founding and reconstitution of cities. Mausolos, the ruler of Caria, had developed Halicarnassus into the new capital of the Hecatomnid dynasty. And Alexander the Great was the founder of the city named after him. In both cases, the tomb was also a place of worship. Alexander's tomb inside the palace in particular was the center of his cult from the moment his body was transferred there from Memphis. And this is exactly the kind of worship we see in Rome, namely the mausoleum of Augustus becomes a place of worship. Seneca, the ancient author, for example, refers to the mausoleum of Augustus as, I quote, the tumulus on which the daily sacrifice to Augustus, our god, was made, end of quote. The religious veneration of the emperor located at the tomb is entirely new in Rome and groundbreaking also for the connection between city and ruler, urbanity and rule. In form and function, the tomb of Augustus defines the ruler's claim to be a new city founder and to be remembered as such in urban space. This claim manifests itself especially while the museum was under construction in very close connection to Romulus, the mythical founder figure of Rome. The urban revolution is thus redefined and remembered as a new founding. Roman emperors of subsequent dynasties imitated the form and function of the Augustan tomb, and thus presumably also the Augustan mindset. This is most clearly in the case of the Flavian emperors, who built their tomb as a templum. It's called the Templum Gentis Flaviae, and it was, as you can see here, a circular building within the Pomerium, the religious boundary of Rome. The best known tumulus architecture of an imperial tomb today is certainly the Castle Sant'Angelo, Hadrian's tomb. You can see it on the right side of the slide. It's from the 2nd century AD. And we can say, with the exception of Trajan, whose ashes were interred in Trajan's column, the mausoleums of Roman emperors were designed as circular structures. Even outside of Rome, they thus architecturally perpetuated the connection to the beginnings of imperial rule, such as Diocletian's tomb in Split. You can see here the palace of Diocletian, and here is the tomb he built in the beginning of the 4th century. Within the palace complex, on the right side, you can see a reconstruction. This tomb of Diocletian was situated within the new palace complex and revived the founder's moment. Only a short time after Diocletian, the idea was significantly imitated in Constantinople, where the city's founder, Emperor Constantine the Great, immortalized himself in a tomb complex within the city walls. And so he took up Roman models while reinterpreting them. Constantine the Great founded his city as New Rome in the year 324. And already in the 4th century, sources compared him to Romulus, the mythical founder of Rome. Constantine demonstrated the Translatio Imperii by having hundreds of historically charged ancient works of art brought to Constantinople from all over the empire. And in this way, he also created a new urban ancestry for the new Rome, giving us insight into the thought world behind the facade of buildings and furnishings. That the founder of the new metropolis also saw himself in the tradition of Romulus, Alexander, or Augustus is indicated by his tomb construction, of which began immediately after the city's foundation. You can see here the location of the monument he built. The architecture of the building imitated that of the imperial tombs in Rome, especially the tomb of Augustus, albeit with Christian innovations in the interior. You can see that the building was located off the central avenue. Okay, I'm almost, I'm coming to the end, okay. The building located off the central avenue in the western part of the city on the hill, and it lay within the city walls. You can see it here. The architecture, and that's very important, we can only reconstruct it from literary sources. The architecture was a domed rotunda surrounded by a square plaza, and inside, you can see on the right here, there were niches in which Constantine's sarcophagus stood along with the 12 stelae commemorating the apostles. So the monument was a mausoleum and it was a church as well, and this combination of function was original and unique, breaking in a way with existing imperial traditions. It's very interesting that already Constantine's biographer, Eusebius, demonstrates that he was also venerated in his tomb. Cult practice at the emperor's tomb is then also handed down by late antique and Byzantine sources. To conclude, ideas about what constitutes the urban are long-lived and shaped by tradition, and this applies even more so to the idea of the urbanity of a capital or metropolis. Concepts of urbanity are often linked to a founding figure. Already Cicero in the late Republic gives us an idea of this. He says, I quote, "It's a common experience that places strongly stimulate the imagination and vivify our ideas of famous men." But I think that this connection worked also both ways. The ideas of famous men strongly stimulate the imagination of places too. Until late antiquity, the successful urban narrative also included the anchoring of the founder into a specific urban and architectural structure, namely the mausoleum. And Constantine finally combined the traditional view, the traditional with the new, the mausoleum with the church building. And in this it was in the tradition of the city founders of Hellenistic times and early emperor. So, thank you very much.